And joining us tonight here in studio, Rusty Hicks, the California Democratic Party chair, and Dwight Williams, he's the San Joaquin County Republican chair. We want to ask some specifics for each candidate, starting with Kamala Harris. A lot of voters have said that they really wanted to hear more specifics. They want to hear a plan. Did she accomplish that tonight?
I think she absolutely did. I mean, given that the stakes were high, that the expectations were high of her, I think she showed that she's qualified, that she's prepared. Tonight, she looked presidential, and I think she gave some real specifics about a new way forward for this country and gave a forward-looking vision for America.
Was there anything that stood out that you felt like, voters would be able to really identify with that or have something solid, to hold on to?
Well, I think the fact that she talked about the opportunity economy, she talked about her own middle-class upbringing. In many ways, her story is the American story, and I think by talking about a brighter vision for America, she had the opportunity to tell her own story, which I thought was an outstanding opportunity for the campaign with less than 60 days to go.
All right, Dwight, your opinion of whether she kind of hit what she needed to hit in this debate?
I think the vice president spoke in broad generalities, which I believe is what her intention was to do in the first place. Not get overly involved into specifics, talking about the specifics about her flip-flopping from going from what your candidate was in 2019 to her current position right now. I think she tried to gloss over a lot of that and engage more in trying to debate or gauge and goat the former president off into issues of personality attacks. So I think she was not more specific as she could be and should be, and I think that was a disappointment.
Well, you hit on something that I know the former president's advisors were telling him not to be goaded, and it looked like he took the bait a few times. Did he do what he needed to do, which was to stay on message and maybe hit her on the economy?
I think he stayed on message as it pertains to dealing with her issues of flip-flopping. What have you done for the last 3.5 years have you been as vice president of the United States? How can you explain the position on the border when you were the border czar and you didn't enforce the border the way you were supposed to enforce it? So I think she tried to be very broad in generalities, not engage off in specifics, which in that sense she had a degree of success, but I believe the president kept her in the line of fire to make sure that she's held accountable.
And Rusty, we just want to give you a chance to respond also. Yeah.
Well, she didn't have to work very hard to goad him into responding to all sorts of things. I think he looked unfit, in many ways unhinged, certainly not presidential, and talked about so many other things that had nothing to do with what's on the minds of the American people. And so, she had the opportunity to talk about her story. He certainly talked about someone's story. I don't know whose it was exactly, but it certainly wasn't on the minds of the American people.
Well, these debates can serve to really help or hurt the candidates as the campaign goes on. So, Dwight, did you see any glaring mistakes from either of the candidates?
I believe both campaigns did pretty much what they set out to do. I believe they accomplished what they were intended to accomplish. We are a divided nation, 50-50, and this election is going to be decided by maybe 20 to 30 to maybe 40,000 votes in a handful of states. And I don't think anything that's happened tonight has changed that dynamic.
All right, and Rusty, when it comes to this Snapchat world that we live in, short clips that then get marketed, for the rest of the campaign, was there any moments that stood out to you that were glaring mistakes by either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
Well, I think Kamala Harris simply let Donald Trump be Donald Trump, let him speak for himself and go in a number of different directions. I think she had a number of really great lines that helped land in a big way tonight, and I think helped define her story and herself on her terms. And I think that's going to be important with 60 days to go.
Were there any moments where Kamala Harris did something that you was like, oh, I wish she would have done it this way?
Well, I am biased, and
Sure.
Kamala Harris is my candidate.
Sure.
But the fact that she told him that he had been fired by 81 million Americans, and he was having a problem dealing with that and processing that, and talked about his crowd size and talked about a number of other things, I think really pointed out the clear difference, the clear contrast, the clear choice in this election.
So specifically, one of those places we saw a clear contrast was on the issue of abortion. That's really where we saw the candidates clash. Here's an example of that.
Democrats are radical in that, and her vice presidential pick, which I think was a horrible pick, by the way, for our country, because he is really out of it. but her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay.
And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest.
We should mention that the moderators fact check that in real time, and there is no place in the nation where it is illegal to kill babies. Be that as it may, how did the candidates handle this particular issue? It's been a big one in this campaign.
And I think it's an important one on the minds of the American people. And I think the contrast and the choice was really clear. Donald Trump has said he is proud to have been a part of overturning Roe v. Wade. And you had Kamala Harris step forward and say, I will restore the protections of Roe. I will ensure that you have reproductive freedom in this country. And so I felt like there was a wandering conversation that Donald Trump had with himself on the issue of abortion. Tried to avoid the issue of a national ban on abortion. But his own Project 2025 makes it pretty clear as to where he and his supporters want to go. And that is a national ban in this country, which Kamala Harris will prevent from happening.
Dwight, so two things. How do you feel that conversation went around abortion? And also, the president tried to distance himself from 2025. How did he do?
I think the president stated it, President Trump stated it well. This is a state's issue. The federal government should not be involved in the issues about abortion in the first place. The promises that were made as far as it pertains to returning this decision back to the states should be left up to the states. We are a big country with hundreds of millions of people. Everybody don't have the same opinion on this issue. I am vehemently pro-life. I believe each state should make that determination among the votes of the people. This has been a contested issue that has divided this nation for years. That was returned back to the people, and that was the right step to go.
Okay.
All right, two more questions. Where do the candidates go from here? How are they going to use this debate to launch into the rest of their campaign?
Well, I think you'll see the Harris campaign, the Harris-Walz campaign, turn energy into action. And, you know, we always recognize that this was going to be a close race. I think that's something we all agree on. I think the Harris-Walz team and campaign is built for a close race. More than 300 offices across the country, more than 2,000 staff on the ground, nearly 3 million small dollar donors in the last month alone. The campaign is built for a close election. Now we got to get out and do the work.
And Dwight, for former President Trump?
The Trump Vance ticket is also prepared for an incredibly close campaign. We've been having close campaigns in this country, really, if you really get right down to it, for at least the last 2 or 3 election cycles. This election cycle will be no different, and the Trump Vance ticket is making the necessary investments to go all the way to the end of the mat, if you will, with this in this November. This is going to be an election like no other. I've said that before, and I think we've already seen this play out.
We can all agree on that, for sure.
So the Trump Vance ticket will go this all the way to the end.
All right. We thank both of you, Dwight and Rusty, for your expertise. Thanks so much.